I think we're all good. Is that recording? It looks like it to me. Excellent. Thank you. I'll trim off that dumb sounding question at the beginning. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a session today on how to pass the MPRE. This is for 2Ls and 3Ls who have not yet taken or not yet passed the MPRE, rather. If you are a 1L, if you have already passed the MPRE, I admire your overachieverness, but you need not be here, bless your heart. So feel free to log out. For the rest of you, you probably know this, but I am Professor Cassie Christopher. We are joined today by Professor Chelsea Baldwin, who is our Director of Academic Success Programs, and thank you all for being here. I'm not able to advance my screen. One second, hang on. There we go. Today, we are going to talk about the who, what, where, and when of the MPRE. We're going to talk about some things that are unique to MPRE questions. We're going to talk about some exam taking tips, and we're going to talk about how to study most effectively for the MPRE. I don't imagine this is going to take the entire hour by any stretch of the imagination. I wanted to let you know that in preparing this presentation, I relied on these resources, in particular, the Strategies and Tactics for the MPRE, which I found in the library at the law school, the Weekend MPRE, which is also a book I found at the library. I can also recommend A Short and Happy Guide to Short and Happy Guide to the MPRE, the Barbary Kaplan and Themis materials, Law in a Flash. As you can see, many of these are available at the library. They're in the physical library. If you are off campus, check through the library's website and see what resources they have available there, or Lexis and Westlaw. In general, as you can probably tell, my theme is here, you really don't need to pay for MPRE prep resources. Everything you need should be available for free, so please don't lay out a whole lot of money doing MPRE prep. Okay, the who, when, and what of the MPRE. The Multi-State Professional Responsibility Exam, the MPRE, is written by the acronym-happy National Conference of Bar Examiners, the NCBE. This is the same organization that writes the bar exam, the Uniform Bar Exam, the UBE, the Multi-State Bar Exam, which is the multiple choice portion of the bar, the Multi-State Performance Test, and the Multi-State Essay Exam. The MPRE is offered 3 times a year at the end of this month, the end of March. It's also going to be offered in the first third of August, as well as the beginning of November. If you are set to graduate in May and you have not yet passed the MPRE, I mean this supportively and lovingly, please do try to pass it in March. Like, take this seriously so you pass it in March, because I can assure you that after you're studying for the bar exam, which you're going to take at the end of July, the last thing you want to do after that bar exam is buckle back down and start studying again for another exam. You do not want to have to take the MPRE in August. So please give it your all, and I am confident that with the information that we have for you here today and with your own study efforts, you'll be able to pass the MPRE in March. The MPRE covers the model rules of professional conduct, the code of judicial conduct, generally accepted common law of professional responsibility, plus a little bit of federal civil procedure and federal evidence law. Federal civil procedure, you'll remember probably that Rule 11 is the rule that says that when we sign our name as attorneys to a pleading, that we're verifying that everything in it is true and correct and that sort of thing. That's a professional responsibility rule. Likewise, there are certain rules of federal evidence that deal with what's admissible and inadmissible and what's protected by, say, the attorney-client privilege. That's also where evidence overlaps with the rules of professional responsibility. So there's a little bit of those concepts in here as well. The what and where of the MPRE. There are 60 multiple choice questions on the MPRE, and you will have 2 hours to take those questions. 50 of the questions will be scored. 10 of those are tester questions. You will not be able to tell the difference, so just do all 60 questions. Now, the MPRE is scored out of a score of somewhere between 50 and 150. Yes, that's dumb. No, I don't know why it is that way, but it is scored from 50 to 150. Now, questions are not worth 2 points apiece. The National Conference of Bar Examiners will scale and equate your scores. They'll adjust them for difficulty in case the 60 questions that you get happen to have been harder or easier than usual. They will adjust your score, but in general, the score is somewhere between 50 and 150. Now, a passing score in Texas is 85. 85 out of somewhere between 50 and 150. Many people think that when they see that the passing score in Texas is 85, they assume that's 85% or 85 out of 100. That is not the case. It's 85 out of somewhere between 50 and 150. So it is a reasonable bar. It is not an overly difficult passing score to achieve. If you pay attention, study seriously, you'll be able to pass the MPRE. Okay, the testing center, so far as I know, the MPRE is still being offered in person. You will go to the Pearson View Testing Center, which if you're in Lubbock is near University and South Loop, that little target right there. I would strongly encourage all of you to do the Pearson View tutorial ahead of time. It's available both on the Pearson View website or on ncbex.org if you go to the MPRE registration info. It's just a tutorial that allows you to use the Pearson testing platform and try it out. It's very functional, but it's not beautifully designed. So there are a lot of features there that aren't readily available. So like there's a little scratch pad for you to make notes, but it's not easy to find. And you'll want to figure out like, what can I copy and paste? What can I not? Just play with the software before you actually go in, because I don't want you to spend any of the 2 hours of the exam figuring out how to navigate the software. So definitely do that tutorial ahead of time. Okay. The scope of MPRE questions are available on the NCBE's website, and I am going to pull that up for you. Can you all see the NCBE website here? If you go to NCBE exams and scroll down to MPRE rather, and then go to preparing, what you will find is the subject matter outlined for the MPRE scope of coverage and the approximate percentage of items that are included. See the subject matter outlined. I'm going to click on that right there for you. It brings you to a one-page PDF of everything that's testable on the MPRE. Now, this looks like a lot of stuff, so I'm going to draw your attention to the most important material. Oh, thank you so much, Angela, for telling me you can't see this website. Hang on, let me show you. I appreciate that. Hang on. Let's try this again. Professor Baldwin, I'm so sorry. When I transferred the hosting duties to you, now I can't share my screen.
You should be able to share again now.
And thank you. Appreciate it. I just do this for a living, guys. It's not a big deal. All right. Can you see the MPRE subject matter outline there? Professor Baldwin, I can see your face. Can you give me a thumbs up if it's visible? Okay, thank you so much. Excellent. Okay, so this is the one-page PDF available on the NCBE's website. So again, here, NCBE, if you go to NCBE exams and MPRE and go to preparing, you're going to find this subject matter outline posted here. So it's just one page, but there's a lot of stuff listed here, obviously. This can get kind of overwhelming. So what I want to draw your attention to is this information right here. Each of these headings in this outline of material tells you what percentage of the questions are going to come from this topic. So what I want you to do is focus on the stuff that has the biggest numbers here. So regulation of the legal profession, between 6 and 12% of the questions on the MPRE are going to come from this topic. But look, the lawyer-client relationship, between 10 and 16%. Conflicts of interest, 12 to 18% of the questions on the MPRE are just from conflicts of interest. So as you can see, scrolling down in this first column, all of these percentages here, basically half, maybe even more than half, of the questions on the MPRE are just going to come from the stuff in the left-hand column. Please do not worry about material that is between 2 and 8% of your exam until after you've mastered this stuff that has a much higher percentage next to it. Everyone who studies for the MPRE gets kind of worked up about all the material that's testing me about judges. There are all these questions about judges, and we didn't talk about that in my PR class, everyone tells me. But in reality, questions about judicial conduct are less than 10% of the questions on the exam. So please don't get hung up on stuff that in a way that's out of proportion. Focus on material that's the most heavily tested first, and then you can get to the material that's more lightly tested. So that's the most useful information here on this page. What's heavily tested? Like, don't worry about this, like 2 to 4% stuff until you're already good at conflicts of interest. Okay? Good. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to show you my PowerPoint again. Excellent. Okay, so thank you there. Now, let's talk about the MPR questions themselves, and there's some very particular defined terms on the MPRE. So for instance, many of the questions will ask you, is the attorney subject to discipline? And when the question asks you that, it means, are they subject to discipline under the existing model rules of professional conduct or the common law of professional responsibility? Sometimes the question may ask you, may the attorney do something or other, or is this behavior proper? So what they're asking in that instance is is the conduct that's being described in this question conduct that would not subject a person to discipline, or that conduct is not inconsistent with the model rules or the generally accepted common law? I'm going to pause here to point out many people have the reaction when they read an MPRE fact pattern, they say to themselves, I would never behave like that. Or they say to themselves, what the attorney should have done is. But that's actually never what the MPRE is asking you. The MPRE is giving you a fact pattern with some kind of questionable behavior. And they're asking you, is this conduct that violates the model rules? And if so, they are subject to discipline. Or if it's not prohibited by the model rules, it is conduct they may engage in or conduct that is proper. The MPRE is not asking you, would you act like this? The MPRE is asking you to be the umpire of this behavior based on your knowledge of the model rules and of the common law. That's an important distinction to make. Likewise, you might see a question that asks you, is the attorney subject to litigation sanction or subject to disqualification or subject to civil liability or subject to criminal liability? Again, you're being asked here, is this conduct that would definitely subject this individual to sanction or disqualification or civil liability or criminal liability or whatever? So I'm going to say this one more time because I think this is the hardest hurdle for students when they're preparing for the MPRE. The question is not, would you act like this? The question is not, what should the attorney have done here instead of this behavior? They're asking you, given the behavior that you have just read in this question, does it affirmatively violate some principle, in which case they're subject to discipline? Or if it doesn't affirmatively violate one of the principles, then the attorney may engage in that behavior is proper. Okay. The format of an MPRE question looks just like the multiple choice questions on the bar exam. You're going to see a fact pattern, you're going to see a call of the question, and then there are 4 separate answer choices. 4 separate answer choices, meaning it's very rare to see an all of the above or none of the above. And you will not see like 3 statements that have Roman numerals, and then the answer choices are like 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 2 only, that kind of stuff. You will not see that. For the most part, you're going to see 4 separate answer choices. The correct one is called the key, and the other 3 are called the distractors because they are very distracting and they're very tempting. So here are some tips that I have for reading the fact pattern. First, pay special attention to the lawyer's or the client's state of mind. Phrases like reasonably believes are important because in many of the model rules, the attorney's belief is more significant than the fact itself. If the attorney believes something, reasonably believes something, then that alone can change whether or not that behavior violates the model rules. Likewise, pay attention to the lawyer's motivation for acting or not acting. For example, sometimes a lawyer's reasons for withdrawing from a case or calling a witness at trial affect whether or not that's a violation of the model rules. So we're going to pay attention to the state of mind, and we're going to pay attention to the lawyer's motivation. All that said, we're going to focus on the behavior itself and ignore the window dressing that the question can sometimes give us. So for instance, you all know that it is a violation of the model rules to incompetently represent a client. We are required to be competent in a representation. So if the fact pattern says that the lawyer incompetently represented the client, but they were great friends and the lawyer had disclosed to the client, I'm going to be incompetent, and the client says, oh, but I love you and I want to hire you anyway, and I'm going to sign a waiver that says I understand you're going to be incompetent and I do not mind, and then the lawyer is incompetent. And the question is, has this lawyer violated the model rules? The answer is yes. Yes, they have, because we are not allowed to incompetently represent our clients. So focus on the lawyer's behavior and ignore the window dressing and the facts around it that are trying to sway your feelings rather than your legal analysis of the question. Sometimes you're going to see a very specific call of the question, like, is it proper for the attorney to represent both parties in the contempt proceeding? Or is the attorney subject to discipline if she asserts such a defense? These are pretty specific calls of the question that are going to spot the issue for you. On the other hand, sometimes you'll see very general calls of the question. Is the attorney subject to discipline for the foregoing? Questions like that require you to spot the issue. So as you're doing practice questions, because you're going to do a lot of practice questions. As you're doing the practice questions, you might keep one eye on when you're missing questions. Is it because the call of the question is too general for you and you're struggling to spot the issue? If you can identify a pattern like that in your performance, then you can help remediate it. So keep an eye on whether the calls of the question are specific or general. Now, tips for choosing the right answer. I'm going to go sort of slowly through all these. First of all, if you know it's the right answer, then choose it, move on, and do not look back. If you know it's the right answer, pick it and move on with the rest of your day. If you're not sure, however, let's do some triage here. So you're going to eliminate any answers that you know are wrong so you can concentrate on the remaining ones. That's common sense. Then you're going to analyze the remaining answers for the ways they might also be wrong. Answer choices that misstate or confuse the facts are not going to be the right answer. Answer choices that misstate the rules of law are not going to be the right answer. Answer choices that misapply the rule to the fact are also not going to be the right answer. Don't be tricked by a fact pattern that contains questionable behavior, but the facts state that the behavior didn't prejudice the client. Because this is the ethics exam, we need to know, did the behavior violate the ethics rules, whether or not it prejudiced the client. When in doubt, if there's a fee question, if you know the answer is right, again, if you know the answer is right, pick the one that is right. But if you've got a fee question and you cannot tell which of the answers is right, or you're down to 2 and you're really not sure, my advice is to choose the answer with the lowest fees if you're really not sure. Now, when the rules prohibit communication, like Model Rule of Professional Conduct 4.2, it does not matter who initiates the contact. So for instance, when I was in practice, I was working on a case that had a family law component to it, and I was representing the bank that owned the house. And the wife herself called me, and I knew that she was represented by an attorney, and the attorney wasn't calling me, the wife was calling me. And she was calling me because her attorney wasn't answering her calls. She couldn't get through to him. So she was calling me to get an answer to her question. And all I said to her on the phone was, I'm going to tell your attorney you're trying to get a hold of him. And I hung up. Because it didn't matter that she was the one who called me. I was not allowed to communicate with that person because she was a represented party. A client's insistence on a course of conduct does not relieve a lawyer from the standards in the model rules. So again, my example from earlier about the client who's begging the incompetent attorney to represent them doesn't change the fact that that attorney violated the model rules by performing incompetently. Do not choose an answer choice just because it has a word or a phrase that looks really familiar, or one that you don't know for that matter. So for instance, just because an answer choice has the word zealously in it, don't pick it just because of the word zealously and you're like, oh, I know that word. Likewise, do not pick an answer choice if you don't understand what the answer choice is talking about. If it has a phrase you do not know, cannot define, do not choose that answer choice. When I was studying for the bar exam, and I would do contract questions, I kept coming across the word novation, and I picked it every time because I still didn't know what a novation was. And lo and behold, I was wrong every single time. So if you don't recognize the phrase, it's not the right answer, so don't choose that one. I still don't know what a novation is for the record. Do not choose an answer that states part of the rule but omits the exception that would change the outcome. That's probably common sense. If an answer choice has the word because in it, the explanation after the word because must resolve the central issue and reflect the facts fully and accurately and connect the result and the reasoning. So just be sure if the word because appears in an answer choice that every single part of that answer choice is accurate and correct. Okay, can you hear the dog barking in the background? How to study. If you like, you can review the Model Rules of Professional Conduct and the Code of Judicial Conduct text. If you like, you can watch the review videos prepared by bar prep companies. All of that is perfectly fine. What is not optional, however, is that you must do all the practice questions you can get your hands on. This is because the MPRE is written in a very specific format, and the questions are phrased in a very specific way, and you need to get really, really good at that, at answering these specific kinds of questions. And the only way to get good at that is by doing practice questions. Reviewing the model rules and the Code of Judicial Conduct can be useful. It can be procrastination. So what I want you to do is, if you have time, review the model rules and the CGC, but no matter what, you must do all the practice questions that you can. So another way of thinking about that is if you don't have enough time to study for this exam, then focus on practice questions first and skip the review. I'm assuming you've taken or you're in right now PR, so you actually have the background knowledge. Doing the practice questions is a quick and dirty way of learning the law as you go forward. Because remember, learning is deeper and more durable when it's effortful. When we feel really comfortable and cozy, like, okay, this is not so hard, I can do this just fine, then that probably means there's not great learning happening. And watching review videos is one of those things that feels very comfortable and I can do this just fine. But that's actually not the most effective way of learning. The most effective way of learning, like the most effective way of getting in shape, is breaking a sweat. Okay, how to study practice questions, practice questions. Because here's the thing, your gut cannot pass the MPRE. It is not a test of what behavior you believe to be ethical. There are a lot of questions that hinge on the difference between must and may. I remember taking the MPRE and one of the questions there, and I'd narrowed it down to 2 answer choices, and one of them was you must have a written fee agreement, and the other one was you may have a written fee agreement. And I sat there thinking, I'm going to, I promise. But that didn't matter. I had to choose which one of those answer choices was the right one, and it hinged on must versus may. So you have to understand the rules themselves, not just your gut. The MPRE tests your analysis of whether a given behavior violates the rules as written. I've mentioned this before, but behavior you are personally uncomfortable with or would not engage in yourself may nevertheless not violate the rules, and you need to keep that distinction in mind. The MPRE tests your ability to read and decode the questions as written by the NCBE. This is the skill that you must practice regardless of how well you know the rules or how well you think you know the rules. Whether you think you know them well or not, you have to do the practice questions in order to develop the actual skill of answering these specific kinds of practice questions posed to you by the NCBE. So, where are you going to find practice questions? They're available in all of those books that I mentioned in the library. They are available online. Quimby has some. Barbary, Kaplan, Themis, and Maribar should all have MPRE programs. You should be able to find a lot of practice questions. If you cannot, reach out to me and I will help you track some down. Again, I really don't think you need to pay for them. There are so many of them that are available for free. If you haven't yet chosen a bar prep company, this might actually be a nice way to sort of test drive them. You can sign up for all 3 of their MPRE courses. They're all free. And self-paced asynchronous sort of stuff. So you could test drive the companies and see whether you like their MPRE stuff as a way to figure out whether or not you're going to like them for the bar exam as well. What to do with the practice questions? It is always my advice when you do practice questions for law school, for the MPRE, for the bar exam, spend as much time studying the answers as you did taking the questions. There's a lot of learning that happens when you review the answers. As you're reviewing those answers, if you got a question right and for the right reason, pat yourself on the back and move on. If you got it wrong, make note of the reason. In particular, you're looking for patterns here so you can address them. I have a chart like this. It's just a Word document that I use the table function. And I'm happy to share this with students, and you're welcome to make your own. And I know lots of students who have taken the version that I have and have modified it. But what this does here, you can see the columns across the top here give us a space to note the question number. Did I get it right or wrong? Then, what was the topic or the subtopic? And here again, we're mostly interested in the ones you got wrong because we're trying to figure out why'd you get it wrong. Is it a topic or a subtopic you're not very familiar with? You might see by the end a pattern here of like, oh, actually all the ones I'm missing are on the same subtopic. Or did you miss the question because you didn't know the rule? That's the easiest one to fix, which is great. You didn't know the rule, or you knew the rule but not the exception. Did you miss the question because you misread the facts? You just got to train yourself to read the facts differently. Did you miss the question because you missed the call of the question? You misunderstood what the call of the question was really asking you. Did you miss the question because you incorrectly applied the rule to the facts? Were you distracted by the wrong answer choices or some other reason? You can make a note of what that was. Like, I was exhausted. I was distracted by my barking dog, whatever. So ideally, when you've done a bunch of practice questions and missed a bunch of practice questions, you'll begin to see some patterns that emerge here. And once you find that pattern, then you can work on ways to remediate that particular issue for yourself. So if you get it wrong, chart the reason. We're looking for patterns so you can address them. If you got it wrong because you didn't know the rule or the exception, Then write down the rule or the exception. You can do this on a flashcard, for instance. You can do this in a Word document. And as you miss practice questions and you add rules to your Word document or to your stack of flashcards, you're slowly building for yourself a little library of rules that get tested that you didn't already know, which is fantastic. I respect flashcard people tremendously. I'm asking you to move the flashcard making to a different portion of your studying, a different point in time of studying than folks normally do. Folks normally do the review, then make the flashcards, then do the practice questions. I'm asking you to switch that up. So do the review, do the practice questions, then make the flashcards or build this outline based on the stuff that you've missed. All that does is make sure that the flashcards that you're making are the ones you really need. They're testable material that you did not know. So that's an efficient way of making flashcards. Now remember our mindset, our growth mindset. If you attended the bar prep workshop at the beginning of the semester, our growth mindset, when we come to a missed practice question, we're not going to get down in the dumps about it. A missed question is an opportunity to learn something. Each practice question is there to teach you something. Teach you a rule of law, teach you a tip or a strategy for gaming the exam itself. Maybe it's going to teach you that you already know this stuff, which is great news as well. But each missed question is an opportunity to learn something. So go into those missed questions with an optimistic approach, with a growth mindset. Some final tips for you before I start taking some questions. Please do answer every question. There is no penalty on the MPRE for wrong answers, as there is on, I think, the LSAT still. Manage your time. So 60 questions over 2 hours means doing 15 questions every half hour. I don't often hear that folks run out of time on the MPRE, but keep one eye on the clock, and at the half hour mark, you should be at 15 questions. At the 1 hour mark, you should be about 30 questions. And so mostly if you're behind, you'll know you need to speed up a little bit. So today we talked about the who, what, the where, and the when. We talked about some logistics of the exam. We talked about things unique to the MPRE questions. In particular, use your head and your knowledge of the rules to answer these questions. Do not use your gut. Exam taking tips. We talked about lots of ways to not get tricked by these questions. And we talked about how to study. So getting the most out of practice questions by digging into the ones that you got wrong. That's what I have for you today. What questions can I answer for you regarding the MPRE? Feel free to drop them in the chat or unmute.
Hello, I have a question.
All right, sure.
When should we start?
Yeah, yes, of course. What a great question. I should have mentioned that. I think in general, rule of thumb, the MPRE can be easily passed if you put in like 2 solid days of studying. So like 15, 16 hours ought to be sufficient. So if you wanted to just cram the weekend before, I'm not going to argue with you. If you wanted to break it out over the couple of weekends before, it's about that time. So if you did 5 hours every weekend from here to there, you should be able, that should be sufficient. If you have less time than that to devote to it, I always focus on the practice questions. It's an uncomfortable way to learn, but it is the most efficient. But yeah, I would say for most folks, 15, 16 hours ought to be sufficient.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. What other questions can I answer?
In the chat, there was an ask, will the slideshow be available later?
Of course it will. And this video is being recorded and we're going to post it on the media site too. What other questions do you have for me?
What's the thing that you find students struggle with most with the MPRE?
The thing that students struggle with most, to be perfectly honest with you, I would say 2 things. The first and foremost, I think a lot of students who don't pass the MPRE the first time didn't prepare for it. They went in thinking like, I'm an ethical person, I know what's going on, I will be fine. These questions will be obvious and easy because I know I shouldn't steal my client's money and I know I shouldn't have a sexual relationship with my clients, and that's not hard. And the MPRE is harder than that. So the number one issue is not spending real time preparing for it. The second one, as I fear I hammered during the presentation, was that students often argue with the questions rather than serving as that referee. So they want to read the question and be like, no, you should never have done that. What you should have done instead is, or I would never behave like that, instead of reading the fact pattern and deciding, does this violate the rules as written, or is this permissible under the rules as written? So that sort of mindset thing. So preparing sufficiently and preparing for real, I guess, and then refereeing the questions. Are they violating the model rules or not? Those are the two things I see most often.
Okay, thank you.
So you said that we should do all the practice questions that we can, but you also said like only study like 15, 20 hours. So I guess my question is, like let's say we're splitting it up based on weekends. Like one weekend, maybe try Themis, one weekend, try Barbary, one weekend, try the other one. Would that be good?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to do it over 3 weekends and say you're going to spend 5 hours per weekend, maybe 2 hours of practice questions, 2 hours reviewing the answers to the practice questions, and then maybe an hour of making the flashcards or reviewing an outline or something on the material that you missed. If you did that for 3 weekends in a row, I would feel very confident that you would get an 85 on the MPRE. I see a question. Do you notice a difference in study needs for students who haven't taken PR prior to taking the MPRE? If you have not yet taken PR, I would recommend you make time to watch those review videos. Like with any other subject, having taken the course just means you spend a lot more time digging into the content of the rules themselves and then seeing different examples of that. So if you haven't taken PR, I think that's fine. You're still just in a fine place to pass the MPRE, but do make more time. So you might need more than 15, 16 hours to study. You might need more like 20 or 25 hours to study. So you can be sure to watch those review videos. What other questions do you have for me?
And you said it was still expected to be over at the Pearson View Center down there on the South Loop?
So far as I know, I obviously did not register to take the MPRE, so I haven't gotten any emails about it or anything. But when I looked on the MPRE and the Pearson View websites, it both seemed to indicate that it was still going to be at the testing center in person.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Always keep an eye on your email. And check your junk if necessary, your junk email, just to make sure that you're getting everything. And do review those emails from Pearson View or from the NCBE if you're registered. What other questions? All right. Well, I thank you all for coming. I will hang on here for more questions. Let me know if you need anything as you study for the MPRE. Take it seriously, and I'm confident you'll pass it just fine. Thanks, everybody.
Do you want to turn off the recording?